Hello and welcome everybody. So recently I had to take a big break from playing video games due to me moving into a new flat, and moving house or into a new location can be really time consuming. And now I find myself in my in-between games phase, as I call it. There have been some fantastic releases this year and I played the heck out of Everspace 2, Remnant 2 and took a deep dive into Starfield, with the latter unfortunately colliding with the above mentioned move to a new location. Also, Starfield wasn't really living up to my expectations, and I'm not the only one feeling this way from all the discourse I have seen around the game. Which is a shame because it nails the art style and a lot of other things, but really feels outdated and limited in many ways, and those things start to have a big impact once you enter the late mid-game and beyond, but that is maybe a discussion for another video. And the next release I'm looking forward to is City Skylines 2, so I'm in this in-between games phase where I put the new games down after spending a lot of joyful hours with them and waiting for the next cool thing to happen. And at this exact spot I often come back to my old reliables, as I call them. Games I already spent hundreds of hours in and know them inside out, but they still create this sensation when playing them. Maybe starting new from scratch or exploring new things after updates. These games often have a very different pacing to what I've played before, and looking at three of my personal favorites here, they are for sure a lot slower paced than recently played games. This creates a mixture of coming back to an old friend or slipping into a perfectly fitting glove, while also breaking with higher paced games that tend to burn out quicker than these rather slow burning games. As if a part of me decides, okay, this is enough adrenaline for now, let's sit back and just relax and enjoy. Those games also have an extremely high moment-to-moment gameplay appeal to me, where it is not about reaching specific goals or following progression systems. Usually I have achieved everything you can in those games, but it is rather that I enjoy them for the pure gameplay they provide. Something a lot of modern games lack, because once you take away progression systems, concluding a story, or similar incentives that keep you motivated, you are left with only the moment-to-moment experience of a game. Of course, this is a highly subjective matter, so whatever is interesting for me and keeps me engaged might differ a lot from things that you enjoy most. So here are three of my favorite all-time games that I always come back to. And the first one is Anno 2070. Yes, not Anno 1800, which is very well received by the community, but rather an older iteration of the popular Anno formula. I really tried to get into 1800 like at least 3 times with a dedicated approach, but each time I find myself not enjoying Anno 1800 after the first initial few game hours. After thinking a lot about it and playing Anno 2070 again at the moment, I would say that 1800 is too convoluted for me. Anno is always about managing production lines and trade routes that get more and more complex than a real city builder. And I really enjoy micromanaging my trade and production chains. This is of course getting more and more complicated the further you progress into your playthrough. And 1800 added some new systems on top of that I found myself not enjoying at all. The new mechanics to keep the population satisfied, the micromanaging of the different kind of workers, and especially the need to grow a population on each production island, with the commuter peers to counter this unlocking far too late for me. While I get that this is a lot more realistic, I do not enjoy this feature at all. And while I wish 2070 would have some of the quality of life improvements, like the total freedom to place your fields, which is such a huge improvement over the older games, 2070 strikes the perfect balance for me to let me focus on the core elements, which for me are building perfect and more complex production chains and connecting all my islands with neatly balanced trade routes. So here I am again in Anno 2070 for the whatnot time, starting an endless game, enjoying a cup of tea and myself building an empire from scratch. Another game that I put an absurd amount of hours into is SnowRunner. Usually I'm not that big into simulation games like Flight Simulator for example, but this one is probably the slowest game I have ever played that I cannot put down. SnowRunner has a rather bare-bones progression system that has never been adjusted to the numerous DLCs they released, but each region on its own has so many tasks and quests to master that you can easily spend more than 100 hours per region, and we are currently sitting at 10 regions with the 11th just around the corner, so you can imagine how many hours you could spend in this game. And there is something immensely satisfying to slowly drive your off-road trucks through beautiful vistas and try to figure out which is the optimal way to deliver a boatload of wooden planks, concrete slabs, metal beams and huge special trailers to that goddamn paper mill while half of the region is flooded. The mixture of scouting new maps, repairing infrastructure like bridges and then usually culminating in huge and time-consuming deliveries to special locations is addicting as hell. And if you topple your truck with its precious load, which you will do at some point, you have just created your very own rescue scenario that involves driving around for an hour or so with some heavy cranes to clean up your mess. Co-op play is also possible. With the introduction of New Game Plus, that is not really your usual NG Plus, but rather lets you define most game parameters to perfectly tailor the game experience to your liking, it has become even better to perfectly kill time while the wind is howling outside your window and you deliver some obscure materials to that lonely hut in the woods, hidden behind treacherous inclines, mud pools that slow you down to a snail's pace and put your latest addition to your fleet of trucks to the test. The last game I find myself returning to is surprising to myself, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, more specific, replaying the Motherland campaign, which you can reset and replay like an NG+. Although I like Bolivia from Ghost Recon Wildlands a lot more as an open world, Breakpoint with the final Motherland patch runs a lot better in terms of PC performance, and the gunplay and overall gameplay is a lot tighter than in the Wildlands counterpart. Like I guess most players, I wish we could get a Ghost Recon Wildlands with all the gameplay improvements from Breakpoint. With the Motherland campaign, the game has a very similar structure to hunting down the cartel in Bolivia. Still, the overall quest design and the detailed world in Wildlands with real NPC schedules and a much better fleshed out world is something I dearly miss in Breakpoint. But for some nice base clearing in a very approachable and highly customizable tactical shooter that rewards stealth over an open firefight, it is a nice game. The class system gives you more tactical options, and replaying Motherland with a new set of weapons and a different class keeps things somewhat fresh. I always loved the setting and visuals of The Division, but no takedowns or stealth options, and instead having to deal with a spongy RPG cover-based shooter always turns me away from The Division in the end. And the Far Cry series has become so easy and arcadey that it is hard to play it as a tactical shooter, although you do have stealth and takedowns. Wildlands and Breakpoint both strike a very good balance in offering a tactical shooter with just enough gameplay options and simple but somewhat fleshed out systems to keep it fun and different enough from your standard PvE shooter. And you can turn off the dreadful gear score in Breakpoint while also being able to tune every aspect of your user interface and HUD to your liking. It is just that Breakpoint, despite all improvements, is stuck with a rather bland open world compared to Wildlands. I hope the next iteration of the franchise will incorporate all the lessons learned from the disastrous Breakpoint launch, and maybe even expand on the stealth system similar to much deeper implementations like in the Sniper Elite series, for example. In any case, this is a much slower paced shooter where you observe and carefully approach your objectives. Like I mentioned before, sometimes I just enjoy this change of pace coming from more intense games. Between Anno 2070, SnowRunner and Ghost Recon Breakpoint, SnowRunner is the game which I spent the most hours with. But all three games are equally classics for me that I enjoy coming back to for a few more hours with the excellent moment-to-moment gameplay that just hits the right spot for me. What are your games you always come back to when you have burned through new games and wait for the next big release? And why? What do you like about them? Let us know in the comments. For now, this is all. Thank you for watching the video, take good care of yourself and always enjoy your gaming sessions.